This entire journey began with a webinar I delivered for MedTalks in March 2026. MedTalks is hosted by Katrien Kunze. A few months earlier, Katrien had published her book, How to Speak Cancer, and the webinar focused on metaphors in health. The idea was for us both to be talking about the metaphors that are typically used to describe illness and other areas of life. Preparing for that webinar encouraged me to think more deeply about the role of figurative language in health communication, a subject I had already been interested in for decades. Why do we describe cancer as a battle, dementia as a thief, and depression as a black cloud, or recovery as a journey? Katrien herself used plant metaphors to describe the lived experience of cancer. Are these simply colourful ways of speaking, or do they influence how people understand illness, how health professionals communicate, how societies respond to disease? Do our metaphors shape reality? Do they influence policy, behaviour, or the ways we understand ourselves and others? Those questions turned out to be the beginning of a much bigger journey that I embarked on that I ever expected or imagined. At first, I thought I was simply going to explore metaphors in healthcare, but the more I read, the more I realised that metaphor was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Think about how often we explain unfamiliar things through something more familiar. We talk about the body's defences, the immune system remembering, genes carrying a blueprint, computer viruses, information flowing through pipelines, or artificial intelligence learning. None of these expressions are literally true, yet without them, many of the concepts become much harder to grasp. The same thing happens far beyond medicine. Economies grow or collapse. Democracies are said to be healthy or sick. We fight poverty, combat climate change, and win elections. We speak of political landslides, grassroots movements, echo chambers, bubbles, and firewalls. Even time itself becomes something that we save, waste, spend, or invest. And once you start looking for these expressions, you realize they are everywhere. That led me to a much bigger question. How do human beings create meaning? How do we understand things that we cannot directly see? How do we explain love, grief, justice, illness, hope, or consciousness? How do we talk about invisible viruses, microscopic cancer cells, black holes, quantum physics, or artificial intelligence? The answer again and again seems to be that we borrow ideas from things we already know. We understand time through money, life through journeys, argument through war, organizations through the human body, nations through family, the internet through roads, webs, clouds, and highways, artificial intelligence through teachers, assistants, butlers, brains, or even ghosts, depending on the culture we're in. As I continued reading, another pattern emerged. Meaning doesn't simply appear fully formed. It seems to have a life cycle, and it seems to have stretch. By that I mean elasticity. It begins when we notice patterns. Ancient people looked into the night sky and didn't just see random stars. They saw hunters, bears, scorpions, and heroes. We still see faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, and familiar shapes on the surface of the moon. Psychologists call this pareidolia, but it reveals something fundamental about the human mind. We are constantly searching for meaning, even when the world gives us incomplete information. Then those meanings become expressed. We create metaphors, stories, proverbs, jokes, diagrams, and symbols. A red cross becomes healthcare. A white coat becomes medicine. A wedding ring becomes commitment. A national flag becomes identity. A single image can carry centuries of accumulated meaning. And over time, those meanings become stabilized. Think about phrases such as heart failure, cell wall, treatment pathway, or the cloud. Most of us no longer recognize these as metaphors. They simply feel like literal descriptions. The metaphor has disappeared from view, but it continues shaping how we think. And the same happens with technology. Nobody actually believes that files live inside folders, that documents sit on a desktop, that our photographs float inside an actual cloud. Yet those metaphors have become so familiar that we barely notice them anymore. Cultures inherit these systems of meaning. Children inherit stories, traditions, sayings, and symbols long before they understand where they came from. Different societies inherit different ways of thinking about health. Some understand illness through ideas of balance, others through heat and cold, others through journeys, warfare, spiritual disruption, or harmony with nature. None of these systems simply describes illness. They shape how illness is experienced. They influence whether someone seeks treatment, how they describe their symptoms, who they trust, and what they believe recovery should look like. Eventually, these systems become so familiar that they appear to be common sense. We stop asking why we describe depression as feeling low, why success is climbing the ladder, why politicians attack one another, or why understanding is something that we see. They simply become the way the world appears, but meanings never remain fixed forever. People challenge them. Communities reclaim words that were once insults. Patients reject metaphors that make them feel blamed for their illness. Designers replace outdated icons. Scientists abandon older explanatory models and adopt new ones. Artificial intelligence is forcing us to invent entirely new metaphors to explain technologies that no previous generation had encountered. Throughout this playlist, we'll explore all of these questions. We look at metaphor, analogy, symbolism, narrative, humor, irony, diagrams, visual communication, translation, rhetoric, public health, patient voice, artificial intelligence, and many other aspects of meaning making. We'll look at why some health campaigns succeed while others fail, why the same medical advice can make perfect sense in one culture but not another, why visual symbols that seem obvious are often misunderstood, why political leaders constantly rely on metaphor during crises, and why emergent technologies are almost always explained using ideas borrowed from older technologies or even from nature itself. Along the way, we'll meet philosophers, linguists, anthropologists, psychologists, communication scholars, and historians, but this isn't simply a playlist about theory. It's about learning to recognize the invisible systems of meaning that shape almost everything that we do. Because once you begin to notice them, you realize that we don't simply live in a physical world. We also live in worlds made of stories and symbols and metaphors and shared understandings. And understanding those worlds may be one of the most important skills we can develop, not only as researchers or health professionals, but simply as human beings trying to make sense of one another. Thank you for listening. Mark Gibson, Leeds, United Kingdom, July 2026.